All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're doing well this fine Tuesday afternoon. You were at the session for applying to prestigious scholarships. And my name is Sophia Tsai. If you haven't met me already, I am the Undergraduate Research Hub's Research Scholarships Coordinator. And so I oversee a number of different programs here at the Undergraduate Research Hub, but I also oversee prestigious scholarships. I'm not the only one that's involved in this, but I think that I am at least one person that you can speak to and ask questions about it. So I feel like it'll be great. We have a number of different panelists with us this morning or this afternoon. And the panelists are our previous winners as well as advisors who have helped our students get some of these very prestigious awards. So I think that hearing directly from them can help you all feel really confident in applying. So I actually wanted to start with each of the panelists, if you don't mind introducing yourselves, and then maybe giving a brief nutshell description of what the award is that you won. And I know we have a couple winners that won the same award, but if you don't mind sharing that, I'll hand it off to Gordon to get started.
All right, hello. Yeah, so my name is Gordon. I'm currently a rising fourth year in Marshall College studying computer science with specialization in biomedical computation. The award I'm here with is the Goldwater, and basically it's a scholarship for anyone that's doing any kind of STEM related research. They are focused on individuals who want to go into like research careers. So if, for example, if you're interested in medical school, you do need to make really clear that like research is your end goal. So if you want to go to med school and you want to go into research, you would fit with like the mission of the Goldwater, but if your end goal is something other than research, then it isn't as much of a fit. But yeah, the nice thing about the Goldwater is that you can win it as either a sophomore or a junior. If you win it as a junior, the prize is like $7,500 and they'll give you that sum once. But if you win it as a sophomore, they'll give you that like sum twice as a junior and once you're a senior. So yeah, brief intro about that.
All right, thanks very much, Gordon. Angela, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, my name is Angela. I am a rising fourth year. I major in psychology and specialize in cognitive and behavioral neuroscience. I am also a 2022 Goldwater Scholar. I think Gordon gave a really nice synopsis on what the Goldwater Scholarship is, and I'm just really grateful to be here.
All right, Lawrence, do you mind going next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lawrence Wang. I won the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship this past year, and it basically it's provides $90,000 up to $90,000 over 2 years to support graduate training. It could be any kind of graduate school degree, and it has to be in the U.S. though. So like if you want to go abroad, it's not going to support that. And I'm currently in the medical school here at UCSD, so I wanted to help support some of my time here at in the School of Medicine.
All right, thanks, Lawrence. Leslie?
Hi, everybody. My name is Leslie Guareña. I was a student at UC San Diego, graduated in 2019 as a psychology major, minor in education studies. And I'm here because I received the Graduate Research Fellowship Program from the National Science Foundation. And what that is essentially 3 years of support for graduate school for your doctoral study. And it's also for STEM fields. And the focus of this program is to diversify the scientific workforce of the country. And like I said, it's a 3-year fellowship, but there's option to kind of shift around those 3 years of funding across 5 years. And at the moment, I believe this is $37,000 towards your annual stipend, and it covers some of your, it also covers your cost of tuition. So happy to help with answering any questions.
All right, Andra, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andra Jacques. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Global Partnerships and Programs Manager over in Study Abroad. So I manage our Global Exchange Program, and I'm also the new Fulbright Program Advisor for UC San Diego. So if you are someone who's considering applying for Fulbright, then I am your person. I'm here to advise students through the process in partnership with many folks across campus, including a couple folks here in this room. Whether you're a rising senior or a graduate student. So we have lots and lots of touch points with folks, and we're actually in Fulbright cycle right now. So we have over 30 rising senior and graduate student and alumni applicants in the cycle currently. And I'm also available to talk about the Critical Language Scholarship, the Gilman Scholarship, and I'm missing one, the Boren Fellowship and Scholarship. So these are all Fulbright, Gilman, Boren, CLS. These are all scholarship and fellowship opportunities through the federal government. So if you want the State Department to fund your study, research, language learning, language teaching, or whatever it is you're trying to do abroad, that's a good way to go about it. Like, let's have the federal government pay for it, right? So I'm happy to chat with you all about that today. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Andra. Glad to see you all here, and thanks for just giving the brief introduction. And actually, I will be sharing my screen. So this is the session that we're at, applying to prestigious scholarships, and I wanted to just have a minute to take a look at what are prestigious scholarships, because you're here, but you may not be fully familiar with what they are. And they are very famous, well-known scholarships. Actually, one I didn't have a logo here for is the Rhodes Scholarship. You may have heard of that. Very many famous people have won that. But generally, prestigious scholarships are really well known, maybe regionally or nationally, possibly internationally, depending on the particular award that you're looking into. And they are very generous, large award amounts. You've heard about some of the amounts from the various students that have won them, $7,500 for the Goldwater scholarships, up to $90,000 for the Soros Fellowship. And for the NSF, it's tens of thousands of dollars also across 3 years worth of your graduate study. So they're really nice awards. They're also quite selective, but that doesn't mean that you can't see yourself as one of the students that can apply, because many of the students that have won here today have been in your shoes just a year or two ago, and they may or may not have thought that they would be the type of person that would win this. But through some time and effort, I think that they did, succeed, and maybe you can as well. They are sometimes for just undergraduate populations, but there are some that are for post-baccalaureate opportunities, and some are to support graduate studies, which can include professional school, depending on the particular award that you're thinking about. Some are just very specifically domestic, and others are very specifically international. So just kind of take a look into those if you're interested in going to a particular location. And a lot of times when you win these awards, it is a lifelong recognition. This is a very famous and prestigious award. You can say, I'm a Goldwater scholar for the rest of your life. And people will say, oh, you know what? I've heard of Goldwater scholars. I've met Goldwater scholars. I am a Goldwater scholar. And you immediately have a connection. So that's just some things to think about. But if you want to find out more information, we do have a website, prestigious.ucsc.edu. Looking real quick at our panelists, you've met them all a little bit earlier. So these are a quick image of all of them, but we have them live here. So I will stop sharing and get back to the questions. So I do want to have students know we want this to be a Q&A session for you all. So if you have questions about these awards, please feel free to maybe raise your hand through Zoom. You can put a question into the chat. But we want to hear your questions for these students as well. So feel free to do that. But I will start off with a question for all of the panelists, at least the student panelists first. How did you decide on picking this particular award to apply for when you did apply maybe a year or so ago? And you guys could select if you want to go first. Feel free to unmute. Or I can pick on somebody.
I could go. So for me, when I first learned about the Goldwater scholarship during my first year undergrad, through seminars like these, and I had a particular interest in him in terms of I think it was a good match for me. I decided not to apply during my sophomore year, but I thought I was ready during my junior year because I thought I had enough research experience. I felt confident and competent enough to express my research experience in writing and what I was interested in. And I just thought it was a good fit, and also it's good timing because at least for Goldwater it is for sophomores and juniors. And I was really passionate about research, in some fields. So that was kind of like my my path in terms of knowing when I felt ready to apply, and knowing that felt ready enough to where I knew like particular people to reach out to when I had questions or wanted some guidance or feedback on my applications.
Thanks, Angela.
Yeah, I guess similar.
Go ahead.
Yes. I guess similar to Angela, I also kind of learned about the Goldwater during freshman year, but obviously you can't apply as a freshman, so I kind of waited on that. But yeah, I love research, and when I read about it, it was like kind of this scholarship for STEM research. I was like, okay, it's kind of a fit, right? So yeah, sophomore year, I applied for it, and then I didn't get nominated, but it was like a really good experience in terms of like thinking about why I want to go into research, why specifically this path. And it was really good preparation for my second time when I applied this past cycle, which I ended up getting it. So yeah, I guess for me, it was kind of like the fit. So obviously they want to do STEM, they want to fund people who want to do STEM research, and also because I thought it would be like a good experience to kind of, try to like put together this application and think about like why I want to go into this field and such.
I can go next. For me, I think one of the key factors was knowing what I was eligible for. And another one was also what field I was going into and what kind of program I wanted to do. If you want to do a master's or a PhD, like what kind of funding I would need. And I decided to apply specifically to the NSF also because I knew some people who had applied in the past. And so it was, I heard from them, they encouraged me to apply. And these are people like graduate students, like postdocs in the lab that I was involved in. And also I had heard about the NSF through it was called differently when I was here at UCSD. So you guys are now the undergraduate research hub. So I had heard about the NSF also through the undergraduate research hub back then. So this felt to me like a natural next step to try to look for funding for grad school. And also specifically, it was important for me to understand a little bit what the process of applying to this specific scholarship or grant was like. So I understood that there was a research proposal, and at the time I was already applying to graduate school. So it was kind of like shooting two birds with one stone with the personal statement. So it was also easy in that sense to use some of those materials for this application. So but yeah, I think it's important to think about what's the right fit for you in terms of how much you need and what sort of program you're shooting for. In my case, after for grad school. Yeah.
I guess just me left. So I think for the Soros Fellowship, the main reason why I applied for it is it's kind of is probably the most prestigious / kind of generous award you could win to support medical school that isn't like kind of privately offered through like schools. So like UCSD and other schools, they do offer kind of financial aid, which does not necessarily mean just loans. Like they also just give you grant money. But like if, in terms of merit-based things, like the Soros is probably like the only one I can think of really. And also another nice thing about it is so I'm thinking actually probably a lot of people here are undergrads. So I've actually been out of undergrad for a while. I graduated in 2014. So I from undergrad in 2014. So I ended up doing like a PhD, and like I did 2 years off as a post-bac at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. So I'm also just happy to talk about that as well. But another nice thing about the Soros is that I think the age limit is higher than a lot of the other like prestigious scholarships. Like, so I think the age limit is you have to be basically under 31 the year that you're applying, versus like for other things, like for instance, the Rhodes Scholarship, which I had looked into when I was younger, I think the age limit is 24. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm a grandpa now, basically. So yeah, and I think the Marshall and other things like that, I think they also have younger kind of age limits. So hopefully, probably for most people here, that's not an issue, but for me, that was an issue as well. So.
Thanks. All right. And a quick question for Andra. How early do you think students should approach you if they're thinking about applying for something like the Fulbright?
So for Fulbright, we kind of start our touch points with students in April, May, June. And we get really serious come July, August. So right now our students are in revisions of their drafts. The national deadline, the agency deadline is October 11th, but we actually have a campus deadline of September 6th so that our students can go through a committee review process. And it's not to weed anyone out or to diminish anyone's hopes about Fulbright. It's fully to help make sure that our UCSD applicants are the best applicants in the pile. So it's our goal to make sure that our folks are putting forth their absolute best essays, their best letters of rec, and that UCSD is kind of top tier in terms of the pile of applicants. So you know, 4 to 6 months out minimum for Fulbright, I think is where you can feel comfortable and not stressed out. In fact, I just saw in my inbox today, someone just reached out about can they apply in the cycle? It's like, you absolutely can, but we're getting short on time here. So yeah, usually by the summer before that fall deadline is a good time to start. And I think Leslie mentioned something really important about, you know, you have a personal statement. Your personal statement is your narrative. It's your story. It doesn't change, right? And so there's no point in like starting from scratch every time you're applying for a new fellowship. You have a good baseline there to go from. So, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle your work and make it, you know, tip-top fresh for each cycle.
Very nice. Yeah, thanks, Andrea. I see we have a question in the chat. So Selena says, congratulations to all of you on your scholarship. And she was wondering how frequently you interact with other recipients in your scholarship programs and what are these communities like if you do?
I guess I can start for this one. So I think a few years ago, this is relatively recent, but some of the Goldwater scholars set up like this scholars community, which is basically like a Slack channel and a website. I don't interact with it that much, but I will say it's very, very supportive. So there's a lot of like different channels for based on like your interests, whether that be like activism or like specific research areas. And because the Goldwater is so broad, like they have students that are in like pretty much like any STEM related field. So they also give like a lot of really good and honest advice if you reach out about like whether that be like personal statement advice or like just learning about like different programs in general. But yeah, I will say it's like very supportive and it's a pretty good community.
Great. I see Dr. Artis has a comment.
I just wanted to say that I think all of the programs would like the scholars to interact with each other, but some of them, notably Schwartzman, the Knight Hennessy Scholars Program at Stanford, and I would say the Mitchell Scholars Program, which is a post-bac year in Ireland, and they build into the scholarship experience this expectation that the students will meet with each other. So every year the Schwartzman and Knight Hennessy programs put on events where they expect all of their scholars to attend and meet each other. And usually that's a chance to have an evening with a distinguished speaker or a chance to do an off-campus experience. I know with the the Mitchell Scholarship, because it's a small program and because Ireland is a small country, that the students meet together in Ireland before the year starts. And I think they meet also during the program experience. So you should know that going into the experience, that some programs expect you to be an independent scholar, and they would like it if you are interacting with the other people in your group. And some programs have this built in as an expectation that part of your experience will be being a member of this group, contributing and listening. That's part of the outcome they want, is a cohesive experience that will help you broaden your experience by listening to the experiences of others. So be aware of that. If you're applying for Knight, Hennessy, or Schwartzman, or Mitchell, you should talk about how much you value the experience of being part of a group with people who have a variety of backgrounds and talents and aspirations. And I don't know, Andra, if you wanted to say anything about how I think Fulbright kind of tries to foster that same sense of community.
Yeah, so actually Fulbright, built into your grant, is on-site orientation. So typically they have grantees get together in DC prior to departure. And then when you're on site, they do a pretty good job. The commissions typically do a good job of connecting all the Fulbrighters who are in country together for a few different opportunities, including in-country orientation. I know that in our applicant cohort, I try to foster a sense of community. We have Discord channels. Everybody knows who are the other applicants applying in the same category as them. And it was mentioned earlier, it's the best part about these types of fellowships is the network. Once you're a Fulbrighter, you're always a Fulbrighter, and being able to tap into that network and take advantage of, negotiate on the name of Fulbright is pretty major. And it doesn't matter the type of grant you get. You can get an English teaching grant, or you can get a research grant. A Fulbrighter is a Fulbrighter. And so that sense of community is super important.
Lawrence, I don't know if you know, is there a Soros community that actually gets to meet each other and talk?
Yeah, so for the Soros, how it works is they have a fall conference every year, and they fly you to New York. Typically, of course, they haven't had it for the last few years because of COVID, but it's in person, and they have like fun things to do. And then I think they also have like speakers, and it's not really serious. Like, you don't have to present anything. It's just it's a chance for you to meet current scholars. So as I mentioned, it's the scholarship only funds 2 years. However, there's this thing called like the Fellows Association. So it's like basically like all of the fellows from every year since the Soros was founded. So I think it was founded in the 90s. Like it's like a way for you to connect, and you can email people. I mean, like I've had people like email being like, hey, like I have this medical issue, like my friend has this medical issue, and there's a lot of doctors in the Soros community. So they're like, does anyone like have like a referral for this city? So it's like a nice, I would say, vibrant community. And they have like monthly Zoom kind of like things where they talk about stuff. And they also send out newsletters and stuff. I will say I haven't been very interactive, just because like I actually don't know anybody yet. I'm assuming I'll become more interactive once I go to the conference, because at this point everyone's just names and faces from pictures. So yeah.
Got it. Yeah, thanks. Here's a question maybe for Leslie. I'm not sure if you are familiar, but or even maybe Andra. Do you know of any similar pipeline at UCSD for students applying to NSF like Fulbright might have?
I know for when I applied, which was just this past cycle, I didn't know of any resources on campus, but I took advantage of people that I knew, or the resources that people who had already applied. I asked for seeing, I met with them and had a little bit of insight as to what their process was like applying. So I'm happy to help with that, if anybody reaches out directly. But it's also helpful to see I found a lot of resources online as well, taking a look at personal statements, research proposals from others who have done it in the past and been successful. So that was where I got a lot of resources from. And also from my principal investigator who I was already working with, who helped me a lot with coming up with the idea for the research plan. But yeah, I think it's very important that you have the support of a principal investigator or someone, a graduate student, someone who's helping you develop your idea. And I think that was the most helpful for me in that sense.
Great, and I see Andre put into the chat that graduate division, now known as GEPA, provides a lot of fellowship support. So thanks for putting that into the chat. And then actually another follow-up question for Leslie. Julie was wondering, how does applying for the NSF scholarship simultaneously with grad school work? You don't need a current project to apply?
No, you don't need a current project, but so essentially my understanding is that the research plan or your research proposal is mostly looked at as your potential to come up with research ideas and to carry on this kind of work in graduate school, be able to formulate an idea and have the resources for carrying out your idea in graduate school. So I made sure, to connect with a principal investigator, someone who would, potentially mentor me for this project. And I made sure to research, the institution where I wanted to go to grad school and kind of include what resources that program had for me specifically, like, what tools you're going to need once you're already at that institution, and hopefully. But I really did the process, side by side of applying to the NSF, and I also applied to the Ford Fellowship, which is another good opportunity, while I was applying to graduate school. So I was already doing that sort of research about those programs that I was looking at for graduate school. And just so, just to be clear, I applied to clinical psychology, specifically in neuropsychology. So, which is a little bit of a gray area with the NSF, because it's a little bit more STEM focused, the NSF.
Great, thanks for answering that question. I have a question for all of the panelists, just in terms of letters of recommendation, because with all these prestigious scholarships, it's required, whether it's 2 or up to 8, I think, for the Rhodes. How did you go about that process of figuring out who should be your letter writers? And I'll kick it off with Angela, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So it's like my process when it comes to letter writers. I mean, what the things that I looked for was, one, knowing, research faculty that I've worked with that has seen me in action in the lab, in terms of basically kind of seeing like what my research potential and aptitude is. And I look for mentors that I knew well for over at least over a year type thing. So so for Goldwater, I think we had it was I had 3 letters of recommendation. So one was 2, which was a PIs from 2 different labs I've been in. Yeah, and then I had another letter writer that more so in terms of like how I went about it, I basically addressed I reached out to each letter writer basically a few months before the application was due, and I expressed my interest in having them as a letter writer for Goldwater. Not all my letter writers knew what Goldwater was, so I explained that to them. And if possible, I would have meetings with them to express talk more about what Goldwater is, and kind of have more of a more of a guidance for the letter writers in terms of what I wanted them to focus on, like what aspects of me I want them to focus on as well. So that was kind of like my process. I kind of think of letter writers as like what type, like there's like different pillars, there's different aspects of me that help shape me as a person. I want the the Global Art Committee to have a full idea of who I am as a person, how I work in the lab and stuff. So, I think it's really, to me, it's really important to have letter writers that can speak to different aspects of you. So you have the full picture.
Perhaps, Lawrence, how did you pick your letter writers and go about asking them?
Well, I mean, it was a little different for me because, or maybe not. Like, so most of my letter writers, I worked with them through my PhD. So, like, for me, like, like, I don't really know exactly what the audience is like, but like doing a PhD is like you're spending a lot of time with people versus if you're juggling research with undergrad, you're definitely not spending as much time in the lab as a grad student. So I think that's a little different. I would just say, like, reflecting back on like when I was asking for letters when I was an undergrad. I would say, like, some advice is don't just go for somebody who, like, you may have not had that much interaction with, but is a really famous or big name. Because one is they're probably not going to have a lot of time to write the letter for you. And so it's probably not gonna be that good. And then also just they may not really know you. Like, I would prioritize somebody who you actually really deeply interact with and knows you as a person. Because those are even though they may not be like a super well-known person, but that's just the letter will read a lot better. And also, like, I'll probably like the people reading your letters, like, they probably won't even know the famous person anyways, because it's all relative, kind of like your famousness. So it matters more about if they can speak to you as like who you are as a person. And I would also say, like, just because a scholarship says you can submit up to 8 doesn't mean you have to. You really don't have to, and they may not actually read all of them too, because like they probably will read just some of them, and like you sometimes you're supposed to indicate like which ones are more important. So again, like, more is not necessarily better. If you feel like you have really 8 people who can solidly speak to your character and your potential and stuff like that, go for it. But like, really, just the minimum is totally fine as well. And yeah, so that's kind of my advice.
I think Angela and Lawrence brought some pretty strong points. I would really emphasize that either meeting or like a very, clear email stating what you need from each letter writer is very important. I even, added links to the specific grant that I was applying to, so that if they wanted to know a little bit more, they could investigate a little bit more on their own time. But I also would recommend providing them with a document, whether it's like bullet points or just things where, talking points for them for the letter, things that you want them to touch base on. So I had the option for the NSF to ask for 3 to 5 letters. So like Lauren said, you don't want to have, 5 letters, but some of them are, not as good. Maybe you just want to give a good impression with 3 very strong letters. But if you do have, those 5 people that are willing and able to write you the letter, then I would, it's just 2 more letters where you can get more people speaking positively about you. But I would really emphasize, telling them, your letter writers, what you want them to focus on. I particularly chose 2 people who I had worked with very closely, who were both my principal investigators. I asked for someone who was chief of my division, just because I had also worked with her as well. So, and then I asked for a teaching professor who had seen my progress throughout undergrad, who could speak to that, to my academic, aspects. And then I also asked Dr. Brown from the undergraduate research hub, who was very familiar with my student leadership and McNair process and all of that. So kind of getting a little bit of diversity there, so that different people can speak to different aspects of you as a scholar, not just as a student, but also as a researcher. I think that's very important to do as well.
Great suggestions. And I want to highlight what you just said about having different writers reflect different aspects of yourself when they write about you. And you can direct that by what you were suggesting, maybe giving some talking points, bullet points to your letter writers. Gordon?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything new to add, but I guess the main things just to highlight are one, make sure you pick someone who knows you well. Two, make sure you give them enough time because letters can take a long time. And three, make sure they understand what specifically needs to be in the letter. So if the opportunity you're applying to has a website that's like important information for recommenders, just make sure to send that to them.
Great, great advice. I actually wanted, since we have a couple advisors here, I would like Dr. Artis or Andrea to talk a little bit about what is that process like on the advisor side when you are working possibly with letter writers or with students reaching out to letter writers, and how do you help them along that process?
Actually, Leslie gave really good advice that I almost verbatim put in an email to students, to Fulbright applicants the other day about providing those talking points, because as someone who writes a lot of letters of rec, I sometimes have a bunch sitting in my inbox or a bunch sitting on my desk. And if I have to spend a lot of time thinking through what I'm going to write about a student, that's not ideal. And I can tell, as someone who sits on a lot of review committees, when a professor, supervisor, whomever has not had a lot of time or doesn't have a lot of talking points on the students. That comes out loud and clear. And so the more time you can give them, the more talking points you can give them, and then diversity of folks writing your letters, as Leslie stated, like for Fulbright, you can have a supervisor, like somebody you worked for, someone like a PI and research lab professor. You can have a lot of different options there. And that's someone that one person can focus on your character and your, resilience and adaptability, which for these types of State Department grants is like almost more important than the type of research or type of study you want to do. Someone that can talk about just your character, you as a person, and then someone can talk about your work ethic. And so I think at this stage, I've met with a few students who had too many professors or too many supervisors in one area. And so we really want a diversity of options there.
That's really good. I always tell students, and I think it's clear from some of the answers that, you have to really put a lot of effort into the ask. You don't ask someone to write a letter, you ask if that person can write you a very positive letter that can address your ability to succeed. And you don't ask it in 5 minutes. I always tell students that I think it's absolutely right to give your writers at least a month to write the letter, but I think it's even more important that in the meeting when you ask, you allot maybe 30 minutes so that you can talk about why this award, or why I see there's a question in the chat about multiple awards. So, you want to be able to have a full discussion with your letter writer to explain how this will be part of your plan for success, why this award is so important to you, or maybe multiple awards, as I said, but don't leave your letter writers with more questions than answers, and don't leave the session only 10 minutes later to say, oh, I wish I had said this, right? Go into a meeting with points that you want to make and tell the letter writer why I'm asking you for this letter. Construct the ask so that it really is as a complete a statement as you can make about why you think this award will be good for you, not just because it's prestigious. And also, I think, stay in touch. If, I think the Goldwater recipients will let you know, even though I didn't write letters for them, we had several conversations during the process. And I know that some of them had conversations with their letter writers, and sometimes it was for a good reason. They were working researchers and something good happened after they had asked, and they said, oh, please be sure to say I just got this award, or I just got an article cleared for publication. So stay in touch with your letter writers and just sometimes write them and say, is there anything else you need, right? Make it as much of a cordial relationship as you can. So that's I guess my primary message is that this is not a simple ask, and it's not a one-time interaction. You really want the letter writer to feel that there's a reason that person was asked, and it's because of the value you place on getting the statement from that letter writer. And that should be reflected in the care that you put into the ask.
Great, thanks very much, Dr. Artis.
I just-
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to add a couple of things that came up while everybody else was answering. One thing was if you can provide your personal statement or any materials that you can provide, I would suggest doing that, just because that way, you know, the personal statement has a lot of information about you that sometimes might not be something that, you know, that you discuss with your mentor or your letter writer, excuse me. So it would be a good resource to send as well, in addition to your CV, you know, different things that could give them as much information to make it as easy as possible for them to write the letter. And another thing was, if you're having one of your mentors, at least for the NSF, so your advisor for the proposed project, if you're having your mentor write you a letter, you know, a little paragraph or something as to how they're going to support you to carry on that research plan. I think that's very important to also include. How are they going to support you maybe with data, with analysis, and like specific things as to how they're willing to give you some resources to carry on that project. I think that's also very important to include.
And if I could just say one more thing, which is, you know, the letter writer for whatever this award is, might be the same person you turn to for a letter for the next one, right? And maybe one after that. So think about this as a chance to, you know, really deepen the mentor-mentee relationship. And as you're talking about why you're applying for Goldwater, you know, our Goldwater folks, several of them have gone on to apply for Churchill. It makes sense for them to ask the same letter writer. So you're developing something that could be a relationship, and that's going to give the letter writer more time to be invested in your career and to give you some advice, you know, as you start thinking about what options you're considering next. So think about that too. This is not a one-time ask. If you know, you apply for something and you're successful, you want your letter writer to feel like you're sharing in that success with that person, and then, you know, that person's part of your career.
Exactly, yes, good words of advice. So I have a number of questions in the chat I do want to get to. I have one that was directly messaged to me. And the question is, do you have any best tips for writing good applications? And I'm just going to maybe ask each of the panelists to think of maybe one tip they'd like to offer. And then if this is relevant, how did you come up with what proposal or project to write about? And I'm going to start with Lawrence.
So for the Soros specifically, you don't have to have a project proposal. It's purely based on you. So you have to write a personal statement. So like, you know, I think everyone's written personal statement there. I wouldn't say it's my favorite thing to do. So I think definitely start way in advance. And I think also have as many people as you can read it. And so like, in order to do that, you have to write it ahead of time. And come up with a draft. So yeah, I think just starting early is really important.
Great, kicking it over to Angela.
I think for me, as I went through the application process, obviously, letting a variety of people look through it is pretty important. I was able to contact past Goldwater scholars and get advice from them, all the way to a friend of mine that didn't really know much about my research. So it's really, I think it's like really important to get that those various set of eyes. And also when going, at least for me, when I go through the Goldwater application, just making sure that I felt like I wrote down and said everything that I wanted to say. Particularly like for me, my interest is going into a PhD in clinical psychology. And, I thought it was really important for me to emphasize like why I wanted to go into this particular degree, and, how does that clinical experience, how does that enhance and fit into my research interest and what I want to do as a clinical scientist down the road. So yeah, just making sure you just want to make sure you don't, like, you said everything that you want to say, and not leaving stuff out like, oh, I wish I should have said that on the application. So definitely take that time. It takes a couple of months. So
Actually, Andrea, do you have any good tips for writing for your students?
You have to think about how the review committee reads a lot of essays. This is their one shot to get an idea of who you are. So your personal statement, Lawrence, I know that writing personal statements is kind of a drag, but that's your chance for them to really know who you are. And that's your narrative, that's your story. It's like, what in your life got you to this point right now where you're applying for this fellowship? And how's this going to be like a critical part of the rest of your academic and career path? So that statement of like, that's showing who you are, like what your family background was that contributed to who you are, what you've overcome as a transfer student, as a first generation college student, as a student of immigrants, whatever your story is, that should come across in your personal statement, because that's the compelling piece. Everyone in this room is very talented. Everyone in this room is very smart. Everyone in this room is going to go off and do something amazing. But when you're applying for these grants, they need to be able to sort you out from this giant pile of other very talented people. And that's why that personal statement is so important, because everyone is proposing really great research and really great ideas, good projects that matter, right? Your passion comes across there, but they just need to know who you are also.
All right, Leslie, one good tip you want to share for writing?
Sure. I think kind of piggyback on what Andrea mentioned. I think for me, it was important that there was a common thread throughout the personal statement and also through the research plan, that it made, that there was a narrative throughout my entire application as to why I'm doing this, where I'm coming from, and why I'm passionate about this specific research project. So don't be afraid to carry that forth throughout your entire application, not just the personal statement, and that you're showing who you are throughout the entire document or the entire application. So I think that's very important.
And then Gordon?
Yeah, so I think touched on previously is like, make sure you give yourself enough time to like get feedback and edits. For me, because the research proposal needed to be written in a way that was broadly accessible, the writing hub was very, very helpful in terms of making sure I conveyed everything in like a really understandable manner. But that being said, I think it's easy to fall into the trap of over editing, because if you get too much advice, then you can edit it too much. And if that happens, then you kind of lose your voice. So editing is important, but make sure that your story, your application is still uniquely you.
Great. So I'm going to move on to a quick question that I see in the chat. Anna was asking that these applications usually ask for transcripts, right? So how do you explain your shortcomings? Maybe you can elaborate on that, how research is a better way for you to understand. And so I'm wondering, maybe I'll start with Andrea to see if you have any thoughts with regards to transcripts and how that can be reflected in an application.
Two things. I think, especially with grants like Fulbright, I think Fulbright is transitioning to focusing a little less on students' academic performance in terms of things like GPA and grades, and much more towards what it is you want to do, how that contributes to Fulbright mission, and who you are. And so I think personal statement, again, is another opportunity to say, you know what, I had a couple of really bad quarters. I was a transfer student, or COVID really negatively affected me in this way, but this is how I overcame that. This is how I worked through that. And whether it's research or you join some club or whatever it is that got you through that, that's an important part of your narrative. And it demonstrates how you're able to overcome challenges. So I would definitely take up some real estate in your personal statement to explain something like that. You having some bad grades or a bad quarter, a low GPA, doesn't mean that you're not going to be a great researcher, whatever it is you're going to be in the future. So take up real estate in your statement to address that.
Yeah, great point. Does anybody else have anything they want to say with regards to transcripts, grades, some sort of shortcomings?
I think Anna, in your question, you kind of answer your own question a little bit, but I think spinning it off as to what did you learn from that experience, you learned that perhaps the research setting was a better way for you to understand concepts you weren't grasping perhaps in class. So I think that's something that you can talk about too in your personal statement. So yeah, like what are you taking from that experience? How is that something you're learning from is also very valuable. So I would just add that.
And I would just add as well that depending on the person writing the letter, if there's someone you trust and someone who's seen your career, this might be something a letter writer can address and assure the readers that you're on a really strong path now. So I would say if you have a letter writer who knows what you've achieved, how you've shown resilience, kind of can say that you had a stumble, but now you are succeeding and there's no reason to think you won't continue to succeed. I think that can be very effective.
Wonderful. Thanks for the tips. Next question we have is it recommended to apply to multiple scholarships at once? This particular person is thinking about 4 different applications and they're like, okay, it's a lot of work, might take a lot of planning, but is there a sweet spot? Does anyone have a thought? Have any of you applied to multiple ones at the same time? And how would you talk about that experience if you have?
I know for me, I applied to 2 different grants, to the NSF and also to Ford. And I was also applying to graduate school. I think I applied to around 12 schools. So it was quite a bit of organizing. I think is going to be very, very important if you're in a similar position where you're applying to different things, whether it's grad school, whether it's different grant mechanisms, having a tracker, having somewhere where you're checking off lists for the different things that you need to get done, personal statements, different aspects. So staying organized is very important. I think it can be a good thing to apply to multiple grants at the same time, because like it was alluded to earlier, you're asking for letters of recommendation and it's easy to shoot 2 birds, 3 birds, 4 birds, it looks like, with one stone by asking a letter writer to just tweak a letter as opposed to write a different letter for each grant you're applying to. So I would also do a little bit of introspection to think about, am I going to be casting a wide net, but maybe spreading myself thin with 4 different mechanisms? Am I also applying to graduate school? It's a lot to do. So, and if you're a student still, or if you're working full time, which was my situation, you might, need to consider what you can actually do. So it's better to do maybe just a couple of applications, but do them very well, as opposed to maybe doing too many and not putting as much thought and care into each one of them. So that's just my take on that.
Great advice. Anybody else have contributions they'd like to pop in? Yeah, no, I think Leslie did a great job in explaining kind of how to pick that number. So I will move on from there. So next question we have, does the recommender have to be from a faculty member? Can a TA who taught a class be a recommender as well? Have any of you used them, or have any of the advisors seen TAs write? And what do you think about that? I think I see, are you nodding, Lawrence, perhaps?
Like I think my opinion of that is it depends on the TA. Like I would say like it would be good if the TA had an advanced degree. So because I didn't go to UCSD for undergrad, but I think some of the TAs probably are grad students, right? So I would say like probably don't ask the grad student to write your letter, but if they're being taught by somebody who has like a PhD or a master's or something like that, I think that would be appropriate. That's my opinion of it.
Great advice. Anybody else?
I would also suggest, if you perhaps work very closely with a graduate student that, like Lauren said, maybe they don't have a PhD yet, perhaps they can contribute to the letter, and you can have both the PI, someone who's a little bit more senior, sign the letter, as well as the TA or the graduate student. I think that's a good way to go about it. Yeah, that's what I would do.
That's actually really good advice. I've recommended that to students myself about potentially co-writing letters. All right.
I want to recognize that it is a challenge at an institution like ours, unless you are in a research lab or have really been able to get to know a professor on a more personal level. It's challenging at our institution. Most students are in really large classrooms and don't have a lot of access to faculty. So if you have time left in your career here, that's something you can kind of work on. Like, how do I get to know? Go to the coffee chats, go to their book talks, make yourself known to faculty. That's something you can work on throughout your career here, so that when it comes down to ask, they know who you are. You've made an appearance frequently outside of the classroom, and they have a little more to go from. Otherwise, depending on the grant, I think for something like Fulbright, a letter from a TA can work, especially if there's someone who can really speak to your academic qualities in the classroom.
Great.
And if I could just bring in one other consideration, I think Lawrence mentioned at the beginning that some of the programs have an age limit at 24 or 26. So the Marshall actually does not have an age limit, but you can get these experiences after your undergrad days. So you might get a really strong letter from someone who isn't a faculty member or a TA. If you have, depending on the fellowship you're applying for, if you have a work experience, something that you've done in the field post-bac, then you might get a really strong letter from somebody who supervised you at a lab, at Pfizer, or at, the Fermi lab, or in another another work situation. I know that last year, one of the finalists for, I think it was Schwartzman, had worked at the New York Times and had a letter from one of the editors at the time. So, just remember that you don't have to race to apply to all of these by the time you graduate from college. There are many of these where you can get some work experience, really show more that you've accomplished to a committee when you're 23, 24, and apply when you're 25. So the letters you get might not be purely academic.
No, definitely great points. And I think that's a really good point to stop it. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here. We've really appreciated the advice you had to give. I do want to share my screen real quick just to throw up this for any of the current students that are out there. If you're interested in some of these applications, there are some deadlines that you might want to know about. Feel free to grab a screenshot. I'll also try to post this on the Prestigious Scholarships website, so that if you want to take a look at them, you can consider looking to them. Please note, though, that the deadlines that are listed there are the official agency deadlines, but sometimes if there is an advisor that you're working with, you might need to submit it 2 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks ahead of the deadline. I think Andre mentioned this earlier with Fulbright, that they have the internal deadline of September, even though the deadline is not until October. So just note that there may be earlier deadlines than ones that are listed here. Also, there's a couple of these here that are highlighted in yellow, and note that those are ones that might be open to students who do not have US passports. So you may be international students, undocumented students, perhaps. So just know that there are options for students, not just for citizens, not just for permanent residents, but also other types of students. So keep that in mind. And then a couple more things to share. For more information, we have our website. I mentioned it previously, the Prestigious Scholarships website that we host at the Undergraduate Research Hub. We also have a number of different advisors on campus. Dr. Artis oversees these various scholarships. Andra can help look at these various scholarships. Dr. Frank is the campus nominator. He's not here right now, but he does oversee the Rhodes, Truman, and Udall, if you're interested in any of those. We also have a graduate advisor here that works in GEPA, and I think she might be able to give some advice and direction for Ford and NSF. I am a general prestigious scholarships advisor, so if you want to come talk to me, I'm happy to talk to all of you. We also had a Goldwater winner, Frederick Rajikara, and he is unable to be here today, but he is a math major who won, and there aren't that many math majors in Goldwater. So he specifically wanted to say, I'm happy to help anybody, specifically math majors especially, but he's open to anybody who's interested. I think Gordon has also offered his support, and I'm sure many of our panelists here are interested. And Frederick actually said he might be posting some of his essays online. So if you're interested in applying for some of the ones he's interested in, check out his website. And then finally, if you're looking for resources, I know it's been touched on a little bit, but Teaching and Learning Commons does have the Writing Hub here on campus. They help both undergrads and graduate students in terms of supporting you in your writing in all senses. You don't have to be taking a class. Also, the Rasa Resource Center, they have a writing collective and they meet every Friday and they get together and apply with things together. So I think that that's another place to look into. A previous graduate winner of the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship program has also recommended this particular resource as a great resource online to look into NSF. So that is all we have to share right now, but thank you so much for being here, and we really look forward to talking to you more. Thank you so much. Take care.